Following an 8-year drought of multiplayer Alien titles, we've finally gotten ourselves a new one in the co-op game from Cold Iron Studios. Alien's Fireteam Elite is a third-person, free-player co-op shooter featuring a 4-chapter campaign of 12 missions in total. At a glance, the game looks pretty good, doing an excellent job at capturing the established look and feel of the Aliens franchise, with the interiors being accurately detailed and appropriate to the setting. There are a few minor blemishes though, like the black void behind vents so Xenos have somewhere to spawn in, or all these blocked off doors that mysteriously only open for aliens. I guess they must be carrying a multipass. In any case, atmosphere-wise, Fireteam Elite looks the part, but it plays somewhat shallowly, I'm afraid. The path of every level is extremely linear, and doesn't change on subsequent playthroughs either, besides the placement of enemies, so they get very samey very quickly. The most detouring you'll get is a side passage or two that lasts about 5 seconds, and that's only so the secret caches full of goodies have more places to spawn in. At first, I thought the pacing was going to be pretty good, since the first level is rather slow and it's something of a homage to the second Alien movie, but after the first mission, any sense of suspense is immediately dropped in favor of just throwing hordes and hordes of aliens at you basically non-stop. The only real reprieve from battle is whenever you're setting up for a crescendo to face off against even more enemies. So you'll conveniently find crates of infinite ammo and sentry guns and other gadgets whenever you happen to need to hold E to hack an elevator. As a result, beyond tougher difficulties or using certain challenge cards to put a little spin on things, levels can get repetitive and samey very quickly. Especially when you take into consideration the layout of these missions, pretty much every one consists of move to location, hit or hold button, move to location while shooting aliens, hack or hold an area while swarms come at you over and over, move to the next area, hold out for a given time until your exit opens up miraculously. That, and maybe sometimes you'll be tasked with walking around a single room, interacting with working Joe androids, looking for the right one that'll let you progress, but that's really the extent of the mission layouts. There is one escort quest and one kill things until the enemy drops what you need to progress section, but that's about it, and it quickly outstays its welcome. If you haven't got any mates to play it multiplayer with, then thankfully the AI isn't brain dead, so these simps aren't going to get killed constantly, provided you're playing on the standard difficulty. Anything higher than that though, they're going to have a rough time because the game doesn't spawn more resources, even though they would if you had actual players playing with you. So you have to make do with not only a missing competent player, but also less resources than you would have had otherwise. Despite being a big Aliens fan, the copy-paste mission formula meant that I started getting bored about halfway into the campaign, since it was just becoming so predictable. They forewent any suspension or horror when they decided to make it a horde shooter, but as a result, it feels really generic and downright lazy at times. It doesn't help that the main campaign only takes about 5 hours to complete, and it feels like half of that is from padding. I've lost count of how many times they had me go into a room, have it get locked down for no reason, aliens will spawn in waves that I have to kill, and then after an arbitrary amount are killed, they'll then open the door for me. In some cases where there's literally nothing stopping us from progressing otherwise. This would happen for pretty much every room during the third chapter, and it's probably to make up for how short the levels would have been otherwise, since they're really straightforward to run through. But as a result, it feels like it's stop and start again as you're being bogged down by waves of enemy in literally every room and not making any real progress. Hell, it would have been nice if they just had more variety of where you can choose to stand and fight, but instead you have to do it where the game tells you to. The whole experience feels like a generic third-person shooter with mediocre gunplay and very awkward animations that are strangely sped up. Given that there's like 1 frame of animation between swapping which shoulder you aim your gun with, they just lazily mirrored the animation and had your gun swap hands instantly. It strikes me as really bizarre because they could have just moved the camera to have it flow a lot more smoothly and preferably stay over that shoulder rather than instantly reverting back the second you stop holding down the aim button, since it will otherwise just snap back to the default position and come across as feeling really stiff. What's worse is that synthetics will turn 180 instantly, which is super frustrating when they're carrying a shield or ducking down behind cover at the speed of light, making firefights drag out and feel a lot more tedious. Pretty much all the other animations look awkward or clumsy too, like the way that your elbow twists from the wrong spot when you're holding the smart gun, or the running animation being pretty goofy to look at. Then there's the way your marine dodge rolls around and it looks like the animator got bored halfway through, so they suddenly jerk you up right at the end of it. What I'm getting at is a lot of your actions feel really unnatural. What further breaks any sense of immersion is the characters aboard your ship that issue your mission briefings and give exposition don't have any lip syncing at all. It simply zooms in on a fixed angle of their face and the back of your character's head, as well as any of your friends or Randy J sticking around between the two of you, with a blank stare as they telepathically commune with your mind. Deep Rock Galactic gets away with this by having a static image contacting you during missions, but this is a 35 quid game that's trying to at least be somewhat realistic and accurate to the Aliens franchise. This kind of corner cutting just comes across as amateurish at best. They didn't even try. But hey, on the bright side, they got Lewis from Left 4 Dead.
Pills here!
At the very least, the character creator is alright, albeit only having about 10 different faces to choose from, 20 if you include both genders, or masculine and feminine, I should say. In any case, I ended up making a shitty Ray from Star Wars for my Marine.
I like this!
I hate it. To be fair, I was genuinely surprised by the level of customization Fireteam had to offer, at least for the weapons anyway. They let you flip and scale down decals to plaster all over your pulse rifle, and kit them out with gaudy paint jobs that look downright awful. It's so ugly, I kinda love it. Much like the levels, the music can also be repetitive and somewhat underwhelming at times. During some of the missions, it can feel woefully misplaced, having what I'd think of more of an exploration track playing, while shooting down scores of aliens in some giant temple. Although not all of it is so bad, and some of it fares a bit better, like the main menu for example. Now, being an Aliens game, it goes without saying that the rest of the sound effects are how you would expect them to be. They're accurate to the movies that they're probably sourced from, and firing the pulse rifle sounds authentic and impactful, even if it doesn't necessarily feel that way at times. Hearing the pain cries of aliens hissing and scurrying about is pretty satisfying. I do wish the characters themselves would have more to say though, but since they're custom characterization and not predetermined characters, I can understand they didn't want to give too much concrete characterization to the Marines you play, but instead there's not even any personality to them either. Instead, it has you pick one of a couple of voices, only to have them grunt in pain or very rarely say something if you use the ping function. So they'll be stuck saying, "This looks interesting, eyes here, medkit here," and that's about it, which only further undermines any replay value for me. Part of the fun of other co-op horde games is having the characters banter and interact with each other. Even Deep Rock Galactic manages this with their 4 dwarves that are otherwise lacking in character, but they have personality. Whereas here, all that character building dialogue instead goes to your support team. So imagine removing all the smack talk the Marines were doing in the Aliens movie in favor of having Gorman do it in Hudson's place instead. Having the playable characters be borderline mute is simply weird. I also cannot help but roll my eyes whenever I hear a voice over the radio telling the aliens to go back to hell when they're safely aboard a spaceship and not in the actual battle itself.
Go back to hell!
This just compounds the feeling that things are just a little bit off somehow. Likewise, you better get used to hearing the same dialogue for each mission whenever you replay them too, since they have the exact same script play out every time without any deviation. Oh, and that's provided you aren't advancing faster than they intended, since they'll otherwise cut themselves off or interrupt each other.
Perhaps better there is a magnetic anomaly.
Add all this to the fact that there's no voice or text chat, meaning if you're playing with randoms, you'll just be awkwardly falling over each other and not able to communicate beyond the ability to ping or use the Fortnite emotes that are included for whatever reason. I honestly don't know what they were thinking when they included these. They're stiff, can't be used while moving, and serve no purpose besides dicking around on the ship between missions. They honestly shouldn't have wasted their time on this when they could have spent that time working on a system to actually communicate with other players in a co-op game. A comparatively small gripe I have is that while the motion detector makes the iconic beeping sound, it only does it a few times before becoming pretty much silent. So it'll let you know when to expect a fight to start, but it won't alert you to stragglers once you've fended off the majority of a wave. I also question its usefulness when Xenos will simply spawn in an event above you without any indication, or hell, they'll pop into existence right in front of you. Other issues include their AI being somewhat exploitable. Due to the way that the levels are very linearly designed, 90% of the doors are inaccessible to the player. However, aliens can freely come and go as they please, but if you stand near some of the doors, they'll stay shut and won't let any enemies come through, so you can help funnel them through other pathways, or in this case, simply trap them between the door. Other times, assets will float in midair, or aliens will simply vanish, only to reappear a few moments later. Something a little more major was the fact that two of my friends had to download and install a certain DLL file to get the game running in the first place, since it wasn't playing nice with the fact that their systems detected Xbox controllers installed. On top of that, there's some basic but essential features missing, like the absence of a field of view slider. As for the enemies, the variety of aliens is pretty wide and inclusive, although pred aliens are distinctly missing. Spitters feel more like an inconvenience even on intense difficulty, since acid is severely nerfed to the point of being a paper cup more than anything. Here, the only real downside to them is stopping you from interacting with objects. Drones and other tanky specials serve as the asshole bruisers to run around, knocking your teammates down before scarpering off, or causing more havoc as you try to DPS them into the ground. I do appreciate that they have different behavioral patterns, so some are hit and run while others will simply charge in and try to maul your face off. Their AI overall is okay, I guess, but some do have their issues. For starters, you can usually avoid them by sprinting and turning at a slight angle so they'll attack behind you. Otherwise, they suffer the problem of using the same set pathways, so you'll get a conga line of them going the exact same way one after the other, despite the fact that the last dozen of their mates died the exact same way. As a result, you can start to predict where they'll show up after a while. It's worth mentioning that I don't think I've witnessed a single instance of a skulker actually attacking anyone though. Instead, they seem to just stand within line of sight but on the other end of the room and stare at me like they're shy or something. At the very least, they do actually use the walls and ceilings to try and flank you, which is more than can be said for some games. About a third of the way through the campaign, you'll be introduced to the Weyland-Yutani synthetics, cause it's not an Aliens game without Weyland-Yutani somehow fucking everything up. Unfortunately, that means this is where the cover mechanic comes into play, with all that obvious and out of place looking chest high cover becoming mandatory to fend off waves and waves of killer robots. While it can break up the monotony of shooting enemies that can't shoot back, some of them can feel a little unbalanced, like the headless melee boys that simply run up into your face and explode for about half your health on death. Even if you use your puny melee attack to try and knock them back, it still causes damage, so it can end up killing them, which means they'll chunk you for about half your health. This, paired with only being able to use your dodge a couple of times before you're out of stamina, means you gotta wazz around or simply run away from them like a bellend. It is at least nice to see them include the working Joes from Alien Isolation, even if they don't necessarily act the same way here as they did in that game. A little bit after this, you'll also be introduced to a few entirely new aliens as they shoehorn in the black goo pathogen that turns people into zombies from Prometheus. To be fair, this did make things a little more interesting, but now it felt even less of an Aliens game since they look really out of place. Especially when you're fighting weird-ass creatures that look more like something out of Dead Space or Warframe simply spray-painted white. Moving on to the classes, there's 4 to start with the 5th, Recon, being unlocked after you complete the campaign. They're all varying degrees of useful, if a bit dull or uninteresting, like the Doctor being kind of boring but essential in some cases, having an AoE healing bot that can top you off while your group's busy trying to not die, but otherwise only getting a group buff that's not very interesting. Meanwhile, other classes get more satisfying to use abilities, like the Gunner being able to shoot and reload at the speed of light, letting you absolutely demolish special enemies with the right weapons. Although I have to say it is a little odd that it gets an endless supply of grenades that's simply on a timer before it respawns. The same going for the Technician Sentry Gun, which has infinite ammo and 3D prints itself whenever it's blown up. Then there's also the Demolisher having micro missiles that somehow increases their damage for other weapons depending on how many enemies they hit. It's all kind of arcadey, but okay, sure I guess. Also, tying in with the different classes is the perk system. As you gain more experience, you level up and unlock more space to place perk points into, and these can be things like alternate functions for your skills, with the gunner getting a concussion fire grenade instead of its regular variation, which sacrifices range for a chance to knock back big baddies right in front of you. The Tetris-style grid can be a little confusing at first, since certain pips and perks require you to place them adjacent to other certain things, but I'd say it works for the most part. Some of the things you unlock aren't super exciting, like a 15% faster reload time for certain weapons. Meanwhile, the faster revival for teammates seems like a no-brainer, since if enemies do swarm you, there's very little if any chance of you actually getting your teammates back up. This goes doubly so during hordes, where you'll get constantly stunned by just about anything and everything. All in all, I'd say it's an okay system that requires at least a little bit of pre-planning and thought going into it, so yeah, it gets a pass. In addition to the experience and perk system, there's a few different currencies and methods of progression present, those being requisition credits and rep script. You'll mainly unlock these simply by completing missions, but you can also get them by completing daily and weekly challenges, as well as some challenge cards. Requisition credits allows you to buy perks, weapons, and attachments, while rep script is used for cosmetics like decals, paint jobs, emotes, and buying challenge cards. This way, you have at least some control over what weapons and basic upgrades you get, besides the RNG ones you're dished out for completing missions and finding secret caches. It's an alright way to handle unlocks for cosmetics and items, so I'm not too bothered about it. It helps that you get an alright amount of them per mission too. Do I have to mention the battle power system that weapons, leveling up, and attachments have? It comes across as out of place for an Aliens game, and I think it simply serves as a barrier to entry for the higher difficulties, serving as a means to artificially expand game time, since it'll require grinding for better gear before you can have a reasonable chance succeeding at the harder modes. I'm fine with them having options to change out the functionality of your weapons, but slapping a straight up number onto it feels inappropriate. I don't really get why they included RPG elements into a co-op shooter, other than the fact that Vermintide did something similar, but better. The variety of weapons as a whole is pretty decent, although I have a hard time justifying the existence of some, like the burst pulse rifle feeling like a straight downgrade to the regular one. It simply fires too slowly to ever be worth considering. I do like the option to swap out your smart gun for a flamethrower for the demolisher though, as well as the punch the sniper rifles provide. I'll give them credit that some of the weapons can feel pretty satisfying to use. As for the challenge cards, these can be pretty hit or miss. Some are simple and easy to breeze through, while others make the game straight up not fun. They include stuff like finishing the mission without anyone being incapacitated, one of your weapons being unusable for the whole mission, and things like that. The one where your weapon jams is absolutely terrible though, and had it where I spent more time reloading than I did shooting, as it just constantly happened. Sometimes it would jam on the very first bullet, so I'd be standing around like a bellend while waiting to change mags, only to have it trigger again. I get that it's a challenge, but it seems like the developers simply didn't playtest this one in particular. Then there's the fact that you can apply cards that affect enemies that simply aren't present in the given mission. Since you lose the card upon activating it, this means you'll end up losing it for no real reason and gain nothing out of it. So say you have an objective of shooting 75 simps in the head, but you're playing on a level that doesn't feature Weyland-Yutani enemies, then you're simply out of luck. This is definitely an oversight that should have been caught and corrected sooner. Whether that means restricting the cards to levels that actually make sense to use it on, or having the enemies actually spawn in so you have a chance to complete the challenge in the first place. The whole card system as a whole feels like a tacked on afterthought. It's like the developers realized how short their game was and needed a way to tack on some replay value, since the levels themselves don't change in any way. So this, plus the battle power system, feel kind of out of place and shoehorned in. It also really irked me when I read that the intense difficulty was stated to be the way it's intended to be played, but then I see the warning saying I don't have the recommended battle power. Which is it? As a result, enemies, especially special Xenos, become health sponges that tank fire from all 3 team members for ages until you finally put them down after several clips each. Thankfully, the Recon class can dispense ammo like it's nobody's business, else you can run into ammo problems pretty much constantly on the higher difficulties. Understandably, some people are comparing Fireteam Elite to Colonial Marines, but I think that's a bit of an unfair comparison. After all, one of them was marketed rather deceptively, meanwhile this game was meant to be a horde shooter from the start. Also, Colonial Marines was nearly 10 years ago and half the price of this game at launch, so the similarities they do share is saying something. Overall, I think Fireteam Elite has the issue of handling like a generic, slightly clunky third-person shooter with an alien skin slapped on. I think it'd probably play a lot better if it was first person, but as it is, I think I legitimately had a better time playing through the DLC campaign for Colonial Marines with my friend than I did completing a campaign in Fireteam Elite. Although, to be fair, that may have been a case of so bad it was good back then. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, Aliens Fireteam Elite consists of shoot aliens, get loot, shoot tougher aliens. The gunplay can feel okay in places, but it's mostly mediocre in others, and the animations are super jank, with the alien AI being a bit incompetent at times. Some players may enjoy it as a casual pick up and play kind of experience, but the choice of 3 players comes across as a really strange decision, since the default for co-op shooters has typically been 4, but okay. All in all, the levels look nice, but have no real substance or depth to them, and as I said, they're very linear with a singular path to progress, frequently locking you into kill rooms until you pad out the mission time. Admittedly, I may enjoy Fireteam Elite in sporadic bursts, but due to the repetitive nature of the mission layout and level design, I sincerely doubt I'll be investing any serious multi-hour play sessions into it unless the DLC somehow rectifies this. The game isn't necessarily bad, but it's by all means not that great either. It's just kind of bland or okay at best. As it stands right now, I think this game is too expensive for what you get. If it was cheaper, I probably would have been a lot more lenient towards it, but I believe that price should reflect quality, and here it's definitely somewhat lacking. So unless you're a diehard Aliens fan that's desperate for a co-op game to clap Xeno cheeks in, then I suggest you wait to catch it on sale sometime.